Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog.
Welcome back, everyone. This is The Changelog, a podcast featuring the hackers, the leaders, and the innovators of the software world. I'm Jared Santo, managing editor of changelog.com. In this episode, we are shining our maintainer spotlight on Caleb Porzio. This episode continues the Maintainer Spotlight series where we dig deep into the life of an open source software maintainer. We're producing this series in partnership with Tidelift. Huge thanks to them for making it possible. If you haven't heard of Tidelift, they are the first managed open source subscription that pays the maintainers of the exact projects that you're using while giving you the commercial support you've been looking for. Okay, here's Caleb. Caleb, thanks for coming on Maintainer Spotlight. Thanks for being an open source maintainer. Why don't you tell me about yourself and what you've been maintaining?
Yeah, so first, thanks for having me. About myself, I do a lot of development. I mean, there's a lot of outside things we could talk about, but the development related things, I quit my job about a year ago. I worked full time at a web agency. It's a Laravel and Vue and React shop, and I don't know. I wanted to. At first, it was actually just to take a sabbatical. I just wanted a break from programming. Mm-hmm. And about a day into that sabbatical, I got hooked on this project that's now Livewire. We could talk a little bit about that later, but that's my main project, and it's been my main project for over a year now. And then Alpine, a little JavaScript framework package thing, kind of popped up along the way. And now that's another project. They kind of work together, but those are my two big projects, and then a bunch of little side things. Yeah, I found one of your side projects fun and interesting. Get Down. Oh yeah, yep.
So Get Down is a PHP Markdown processor, but it's actually not. It's actually just a facade for the GitHub Markdown API.
Yeah,
that was awesome. That's a nice little hack. So basically, just you treat it like it's a Markdown parser, but it's actually going out and hitting their API. Is that right?
Yeah, it's awesome because Markdown parsing is historically annoying.
Yeah.
Any of the processors, they mostly work, but then there's little things about them that just break down, and I think my standard for Markdown is basically GitHub. Like I mostly use it inside of GitHub, so I'm really familiar with the way it processes Markdown. And they also offer all of their styling in like open GitHub Primer. It's their like CSS framework.
Okay.
So I found this API. I kind of stumbled on it. I was like, wait a minute. You can hit a public API, send it Markdown, and it'll spit back to you HTML as if GitHub already formatted it.
It's like GitHub flavored Markdown.
Yeah, and it is
all their features and everything.
Yep, you can opt in or out of GitHub flavor if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I used it, and it was so easy. It's definitely the easiest way to get some quick GitHub or some quick Markdown parsing. Yeah, and I used it, and I thought I'd package it up and made it. Yeah, but that was one of those. There's lots of those little fun side things that I have no real plans or big visions for. They're just fun and helpful.
Absolutely, and I loved your warning in the README. You say, "Warning: this package is a fraud."
Yeah.
All it does is fire off your Markdown to GitHub. It's like, well, it's good that it says that up front.
They always start out being a fraud, like it's something simple that I do, or I'm like, oh, this is, I'll put this in a package because I would want it in a succinct little package. I wouldn't want to copy this GitHub gist or something, but It's so simple. Like, people will be like, wait a minute, that's all the packages. But then it always grows, like as people find new optimizations and features and whatnot, they end up earning their own stripes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love that you took a sabbatical or you quit your job and you want to get away from programming, and then you took like basically one day off and then Livewire begins. Are you just addicted to the game or what's the deal?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is addiction to the game. I thought that I would. So we go down to Florida every spring. Well, it started last year. So for the sabbatical, I thought this is a perfect break. I'm going to Florida for 2 months. I'm from Buffalo, so it's very snowy and Hoth-like in Buffalo around this time of year. Mm-hmm. And we went down to Florida, and I brought this stack of books. I brought a box of books because I thought this is going to be it. this is gonna be like real me time. I'm gonna read books. I'm gonna fish. I'm gonna hike. All these things. And I read 3 or 4 pages of one book the entire trip. And that I think I just have these hopes that I don't know, but yeah, I love programming, and it's there's always a new challenge or a fun thing to dig into. So
that's me when I travel. I always bring a book with me when I travel. And then basically it's just like, which book do you want to carry around the entire trip? I'm never going to actually read it. I'm going to I finally get to my hotel and I'm so exhausted that I'm like, I just flip on the TV and fall asleep.
Same thing. So. I gave up on the traveling with book thing. Yeah. It's like podcasts, all sorts of stuff for traveling. I'm always like way, way over prepared for content.
Right. So let's talk about Livewire. So I'm not very familiar with the Laravel community. We've done a couple shows over the years on Laravel, but for those who don't know what Livewire is, this is your biggest open source project. Tell us what it is, what it does, and why you began it on sabbatical.
Yeah. So Laravel, a great analog for Laravel is Rails. So if you need a mental framework, Rails or even, Rails is definitely the closest, but Django or even Express, like any backend framework, Laravel's a backend web framework. Yeah. So Livewire, it's a very unique thing, and nothing exists exactly like it. It got its inspiration from this project called Phoenix LiveView. So Phoenix is another backend framework for Elixir. So it's kind of the Rails for Elixir. And I saw that this is what spurred it. I saw the little blog post. They released this demo of Phoenix LiveView at Phoenix ElixirConf or whatever. And the concept was they used WebSockets. Well, maybe I'll just describe what I saw that kind of turned me on. Okay. It was like a backend template that had like echo statements in a backend template like you see in backend templates. But then there was also the syntax for listening for a click on an element and firing a method, but it was a reference to a backend method. So it was super weird. It looked like almost like Vue.js or something, or React or something like in the DOM. Right. But instead of calling a JS function, somehow it called like a controller method and manipulated some state that presumably exists on the back end and then re-renders the template in the back end and then swaps it out in the front end. So there's this weird blurring of lines between back end and front end. And they used WebSockets to keep a persistent connection on the back end. So I was just floored by this idea. There's a lot of sort of my the things that I've been preaching or I guess my, the things I've been campaigning for in my career as a web developer. I guess the arc of my career as a web developer was like Novice, jQuery, CodeIgniter, basic stuff, vanilla PHP. Then I got into Laravel and started ramping up a little bit. Then I got into Vue.js. And so I went like hard into the JavaScript community and was basically building SPAs with a Laravel backend. And then so that's kind of the peak of the arc. And then the slope down is me realizing that in many ways I wasn't better off, all the complexity I had taken on. And so I started listening to a bunch of DHH stuff, Basecamp stuff, a lot of the people who, are preaching about basically keeping it simple and stepping back from that. So that's like the second half of my career arc, is stepping down from a lot of that craziness, that perceived craziness. I know it's not crazy for everybody. But sort of stepping away from the SPA architecture. And so this was perfect timing. I was already kind of embracing the back end. I was going back to the back end more, stepping away from the SPA. And then this came along and I went, oh my gosh, like this is everything I ever wanted. It seemed like a have your cake and eat it too type thing. Mm-hmm.
So you saw Phoenix LiveView, which is still very new and is still either beta-e or out. I can't remember if it's like out, but still under heavy development. And you thought, okay, well, Laravel needs this or something like this.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want to do this in Laravel, so I'll build it. I'll see what happens. And it really was just a proof of concept. It took me probably a day of like fun hacking, setting up the WebSocket connection. And, really, it was pretty basic actually. And I tweeted it out, this little proof of concept, and something like, this thing blew my mind, blah, blah, blah. And people really dug it. And it became kind of a mini Twitter sensation in our tiny little corner of the internet. And yeah, so basically then I was like, all right, well, I should turn this into, a pack. People are like, are you going to package this up? And I'm like, yeah, probably. But, it might take me a week or two, which is so funny.
Yeah.
Like
I remember, a year or whatever it takes.
I actually didn't launch anything publicly for another 5 or 6 months. That's a really interesting story in itself that I'd love to go into. But yeah, I wanted to build it and I did it, and it ended up actually taking a very different form. So it behaves different. It has some like fundamental differences to Phoenix Live View that kind of emerged over time as we started using it and, making decisions.
So it's kind of like when a movie is inspired by a true story, whenever they say inspired by a true story, this movie is a movie of fiction. It's not, It's not based on it. Even I think there's certain rules around what they can even say inspired by, and then based on a true story. Right. And then there's like an actual true story. And so this is kind of like inspired by Phoenix Live View, but by the time you were finished or, getting to production, it was different in the way that it goes about achieving similar goals. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. It used to be, I used to say a lot, like, I used to reference Phoenix Live View a lot, talking about it. Cause like, oh, this is Phoenix Live View for Laravel. But yeah, I don't do that anymore. It's so far from being anything but inspired. Yeah.
So the tagline is a magical front end framework for Laravel. If you can describe what it does today without referencing Phoenix Live View, how would you do that?
Yeah. So all the taglines are garbage. I haven't updated them in a while. I need to really put my head to that. When it first started, it was all magical and new to me. So all the taglines are like weird. They're like a weird framework that's magical and will confuse you and whatever. But yeah, so how would I describe it? So I guess there's two ways of kind of approaching it. There's the magical bewilderment way where you look at a backend template that can somehow interact with the front end and the template and the back end at the same time. So somehow this like I described earlier, like it's as if it's Vue.js, but you can call a method on the back end and everything will re-render and magic will happen. That's one way of looking at it. For me, it's really more of like a framework. It's like an Ajax framework. It's a framework for making calls to the back end, getting HTML and changing what's on the page, but providing lots of helpers for that. So I guess it's still something I have a hard time explaining quickly. But if you're interested, we could walk through like kind of how you could arrive at Livewire naturally.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay. So have you encountered the like server fetched partials pattern or this pattern of instead of sending Ajax requests to get JSON, you send an Ajax request to get HTML and then swap only a part of your page?
Yes.
So this is the fundamental concept behind TurboLinks, PJAX, and Intercooler, a bunch of these frameworks that do this thing. And if you go on GitHub and you open up the DevTools and just look at the Ajax requests, like everything you do on GitHub does this. It sends an Ajax request, and instead of getting JSON back, it gets a little snippet of HTML back and then swaps it into the page in real time.
Right.
Yeah. So I started using that pattern in my day-to-day development to kind of cure some of this JavaScript complexity to keep, the templates on the back end. So I started doing that a lot. And basically that is the fundamental concept behind Livewire. Except instead of you having to go, all right, here's a button. I'll use jQuery to register a click listener so that when this button is clicked, I'll send an Ajax request to get a new template of, let's say that it's a refresh button on a list of invoices or something, to get the new list of invoices in HTML and then use like .inner HTML to swap it into the page. Livewire just does all the wiring for you and gives you a declarative API where you can say like wire::click equals refresh or something. And then you'd have a method in the back end called refresh that would, manipulate some state and re-render the template.
Well, you're speaking my language because we at changelog.com use Phoenix on our back end, and we actually use TurboLinks with Phoenix.
Nice.
So I'm not just familiar with the style of writing web apps, but I'm also pro. Like I think it's a great way to do it for many, many use cases. So you've been working on Livewire. It sounds very cool. You have lots of people interested in it. You have people using it. You also have Alpine.js, which you mentioned. I'm curious though, because you quit your job a year ago, and so I'm wondering, like, where's the money coming from at this point? Are you living off savings? Are you
that's a great question.
Building customer things with Livewire? What's the deal?
Yeah, so I will say that I maybe barely consider myself in a sustainable place. So this started out as a sabbatical. I've been really into like financial independence and that whole community for a while. So I've already kind of taken on the habits of somebody reaching for early retirement. So I cranked up my savings rate when I was working full time, and I was just kind of piling money away in investments. And my standard of living is pretty low. Like my wife and I both, we don't have any school debt. We share one car. There's a lot of things that we rent a small apartment. There's a lot of things about our life that just, we don't need a ton of money. So there's that. There's also the pile of money, sitting there. And so I went to take this sabbatical and thought, I can live for 2 months on no income easily. And so I did that, and then it just kept going. And at some point, so I decided I'll never pull from savings. Like I'll never go into my investments. Anything I put in for like 401k or anything like that, I'll never do that. If I get to that point, I'll get a job or something. But so my wife she's a photographer, and so she brings in some money. Where before it was always just kind of on the top because I had the developer job, and now it's,
right. You were saving that, but now you're kind of living off that more.
Yeah, now we're living off that partially. And then I started freelancing, but I didn't want to jump into big projects that detracted from the work I was doing. So I started advertising kind of like, how would you describe it? Like almost like freelancing as a service, or like a la carte freelancing. Like things.
What do you mean?
So I would basically reached out and was like, all right, I want to do mentorships like an hour or 2 hours a week where you just get on a call with me and I help you with what you're doing. You ask me questions and stuff like that. So that was the first phase of freelancing. And I charged $150 an hour. So it was like a decent rate. And I just wanted like extra money, but I didn't want to really get into a real project. I didn't want something that's really going to take my brain away. So I started doing that, and I still have some of the same mentoring clients. So I do a lot of little pocket.
Are these professionals? Are these people that are trying to get into programming? Like who can, at an individual level, spend $150 an hour for training?
Yeah. So generally they're professionals and they're Laravel developers. So I guess I've been fortunate enough that over time I've built a bit of an audience in the Laravel community. So it's kind of been my thing for, I don't know, a while now. And so I've spoken at Laracon, like three Laracons. I'm speaking at 2 this year, so I have a little bit of a name in the community, and I've already done a lot of educating publicly. And I worked for Titan, which is one of the like top, Laravel shops. So I had kind of this, like, that really was the power behind this, was that I already had this audience. And so the people, it wasn't just beginners coming to me going, how do I program? It was like people who listen to my podcast and know how I think and are already like in deep on projects, whether it's for a company or they're, solopreneurs or whatever.
Are they using Livewire or are they just using Laravel?
So now they're mostly using Livewire. It's funny how that happens.
That's even mentoring them. We're like, here, try this.
I know.
This is awesome.
When I started it, Livewire wasn't in a place for me to recommend anybody use in production. So, I mean, I do mentoring for really anything. It doesn't have to be Livewire. And I really don't explicitly push Livewire in any of my clients. I do push Alpine.
Okay.
That's interesting why I do that. But I'm mostly mentoring people who are already professional developers and have real production Laravel applications. Yeah.
So what's Alpine real quick?
If you're familiar with Vue.js, it's very, very similar to Vue.js. So if you know how to use Vue, you basically know how to use Alpine.
Why not use Vue then?
Yeah, right. So I had described how I started going a little bit away from the front end heavy world and back to the back end, and simple little vanilla, like JavaScript sprinkles around my apps to do little things, but not writing the entire template in Vue or React. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty hard on that, using TurboLinks and then Vanilla.js for the rest. But I ended up in this place of like, okay, I don't want to buy in fully to a front end framework, because that is it. Like when you're in a front end framework, you've bought in, like it owns your entire front end. So you can't mix. It's very hard to mix things. Your entire DOM is rendered from a virtual DOM, so you don't have control over it anymore. You've surrendered control to their paradigm, which is powerful. But for me, I was stepping back from that. So that was the one end, was like, there's tons of power there. Declarative, UIs where you can just set some state. You can manipulate state and your UI reacts. And then on the other end, I was in Vanilla.js sprinkles land, and I don't know. I just felt like it wasn't sufficient. It was like I was back in the jQuery days for me, where I'm registering click handlers everywhere and manipulating DOM elements. And it felt really imperative. It felt brittle in a lot of ways. And just annoying, not expressive. Like Vue is so declarative. You have a template, and React too. You have a template, and you can see in the template how things are attached to state. And then you can just worry about changing the state. So I had felt kind of like in this middle place. And when I had reached out to people and been like, just on Twitter, like, this is what I want. How do I get it? And most people said, well, Stimulus is that. And I'm sure you've encountered Stimulus.
Yeah, we had David on the show when he announced Stimulus.
Oh, no way.
So
nice.
I haven't used it, but I've spoken with him about it in some detail.
Okay. Yeah. So Stimulus, if you read the docs or the splash page, it's pretty much exactly what I'm describing. It's like, keep your HTML, or what is it? Some behavior for the HTML you already have, or something like that.
Yeah, they're really good at their taglines, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Their messaging, their philosophy, everything is just spot on. So I'm already a big Basecamp fan, DHH fan, whatever, all those things. So this seemed right up my alley. And his philosophy on like monolithic architecture and all the stuff, I'm just totally on board with. And I wanted this to be the silver bullet. But for me, it didn't even, well, I guess I don't want to like trash the framework, because a lot of people love it, but it just didn't feel good.
I love everything DHH does except Stimulus.
Honestly, that's pretty true. For some reason, it feels really imperative. It also feels like I don't even need it, because I end up writing a bunch of DOM manipulation myself anyway. So I don't know. It's a light framework. It's very unopinionated. It's very light.
Are you speaking of Alpine now or Stimulus?
Sorry, Stimulus.
Yeah.
Light in the sense, it's actually not light like kilobytes wise, but it's light in the sense that you end up having to kind of create your own patterns for things.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So anyway, Alpine is, in my mind, the perfect balance between those two paradigms, between this Vanilla.js sprinkles in your backend rendered app, and this all SPA Vue or React or Angular front end that is, a huge ecosystem to buy into. So I wanted to keep all the good of that end, which is, like I had mentioned, declarative templates and reactive state and everything, but without the virtual DOM, without separate JS files for every component, without all that stuff. So Alpine basically is an in HTML framework. So you mostly use it directly in your HTML with attributes, and the attributes are prefixed with X hyphen. So an Alpine component, you declare an Alpine component with X hyphen data, and then you pass in a JSON object, and that's your data for the component. So everything in that little DOM tree right there is all related to that data. And you can add on little X hyphen attributes and interact with that data anywhere inside that component. So if you're familiar with Vue, the analogy is the data property of a Vue component. Basically, I'd realized I want Vue, but I just want the data property, and I don't need anything else. And I want to keep all the template stuff so I can listen for like V on click, things like that. Or V show, so you can toggle something on and off, or V bind, an attribute like a style attribute or a class attribute. So Alpine, you have X data, and then you declare some state. Let's say show is false, like show : false. That would be your state for the component. Then you could have let's say a drop down, like just a div with some content in it. You could add X show, and then, well, you would pass in the state. So show, in this case, it's X hyphen show equals show. I should have used is open or something. And so then you could add a button, and on that button, you could say X on click, show equals true, or show equals not show. So you can listen for events and manipulate the state. And then you can also sort of declare state or declare DOM representation based on that state, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense to me because I'm staring at the README. I'm not sure if it makes sense just in audio.
Yeah,
but
it's
listeners,
a hard
if you're
thing
confused, click through to the show notes, grab the README, and it will all make sense. This does seem pretty cool. And I was looking for the package size, minified and gzipped 4.64 kilobytes. Now there's a sales pitch right there that talks to me.
Yeah, it started at when the first version was like less than 3 kilobytes. It's grown since then, but yeah, it's so slim. I wanted something that was just, I felt like the things I wanted weren't that hard to accomplish. Like I felt like the things I want to do, I don't need a virtual DOM. I don't need a template compiler. I don't need any of these things. I was like, what if I implemented Vue, but using native DOM APIs? Like, what if I just crawled through the DOM and I used like .get attribute, or query selector, stuff like that to get data out of the attributes. And then if I want to set data, I can use like .value equals or .class list .add, stuff like that. So Alpine internally, I don't know if there's any dependencies. There might be like one dependency to make like getting something out of an object easier, but there's no real dependencies. It's just me using, I don't know, my knowledge of DOM APIs to do what I need to do. So it ends up being a lot more lightweight than something like Vue that literally has to take your entire HTML template and parse it out into an abstract syntax tree, build up this observable object thing, and then maintain like virtual DOM diffs and a DOM app, like all this stuff that I just don't have to do.
Well, fact check true. I'm on your package JSON. You have some dev dependencies, but there's an empty object there in your dependencies list. So Alpine, no dependencies. Very cool. This episode is brought to you by TideLift, managed open source backed by maintainers. Save time and reduce risk with a TideLift subscription. Manage your application's dependencies covering millions of open source projects across JavaScript, Python, Java, PHP, Ruby, .NET, and more. Subscriptions include security updates, licensing verification and indemnification, maintenance and code improvement, package selection and version guidance, roadmap input, and more. The bottom line is this: you get all the capabilities you expect from commercial software, but for all of the key open source software that you're already using and depending on. TideLift works with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and more. They support every cloud platform out there, and of course, you can try it absolutely free. Start your free trial today at tidelift.com. So Caleb, the thing that caught my eye of what you've been up to, because like I said, I'm not deep in the Laravel community, and I'm now excited about Alpine, but I did not find Alpine until just now. What I did find was Sushi. Yeah.
That's funny. I think whoever reached out to me from the changelog, I don't know, maybe I just assume it's Alpine now. That's funny. I thought that like this interview is basically because of Alpine.
You are incorrect. So I reached out to you, funny. And it had nothing to do with Alpine. It had everything to do with Sushi. So this is our Maintainer Spotlight series, and I am very keen on new models of open source maintainer sustainability.
Yeah.
And what I came across was Sushi, and I'll just say it again. Our audience is like, what does this have to do with food? No, it's a repo called Sushi on your GitHub. And the thing that caught my eye was this package is sponsorware. Like I saw that and I was like, sponsorware. What? And here you have, well, first of all, Sushi is what you call Eloquent's missing array driver. I assume Eloquent is like an ORM or something.
Yeah, it's Laravel's ORM.
Okay. So it's a library, a PHP library. But then it says this package is sponsorware. And then you said it's updated. You updated your README
yeah,
from the point. Okay, so here's what I grabbed. It said currently, this is no longer true, but it did say currently this package is only available to people who sponsor me on GitHub. Once I have a total of 75 GitHub sponsors, I will make this package fully open source. And then it said 26 more sponsors to go in parentheses. Sounds like you've hit your goal, because
yeah, I hit it a while ago. I didn't update the README.
Okay,
imagine that. I hit it in like 2 days. Yeah.
Awesome. So this is interesting. So right now, Sushi, you go there and you see there's source code and there's a sushi.php. I'm assuming beforehand it was just a README. Tell me about, first of all, this idea of sponsorware.
Yeah.
You talked about how you're trying to find ways of becoming sustainable without necessarily going to get a job again. And I'm wondering if this is a brand new thing you made up, if there's other people doing this. It just seems like a new model that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah. This is, so it is invented, but not just by me. My co-host on my podcast, No Plans to Merge, Daniel, we did a whole episode on just open source sustainability, basically. It's from our podcast is really informal, and we really just like pick a stance, and the other person usually picks the other stance, and we just kind of hash it out for the sake of hashing out an idea. So my stance was, there are tons of agencies and companies who are benefiting directly from open source software and even advertising themselves as shops that, write in that software. And the people maintaining the software are broke and like the agencies don't pay them any money. And they're just, rolling around in money. And these open source maintainers are rattling a tin can, begging for money. And and this is funny because I think I'm usually not one to like take up mantles like this, but because I'm in this position, I totally feel it. Like I totally get it now that like, oh my gosh, it's really, really hard to make money in open source. It's mostly you begging people, hoping that your project gets big enough that an enterprise something picks it up and either hires you or gives you, or maybe like eventually you'll have a conference that you can sell sponsorships to. You can have logos on the docs, like, or really the most viable option is educational materials, selling an ebook or a course. But I'm sort of in this position where I get it now. I'm like, who's got time to make a course? Like I'm buried up to my eyeballs in GitHub issues and PRs and everything. Yeah. Like who's got shouldn't the work I'm doing right now justify the payment in itself? So that was sort of my position, was like, all right, Daniel, let's argue this. Like, I think that there's this crazy thing where nobody's paying these open source maintainers, and I'm in that place right now where I'm like kind of living unsustainably. And, but I don't want to be the one to go on Twitter and be like, hey, everybody should pay me money. So we started talking about some different ideas, and this really emerged from that discussion. There was a moment in that discussion where I was talking about Sushi, which we could talk, that's kind of a funny package as an example for this. But I was talking about Sushi and yeah, I think I'm going to open source it, but and so I posed to him this problem. I'm like, I like open source. Like I love the open source movement. I love everything about it. And something about charging for software and not making it open source feels weird to me. Like I've benefited so much from people sharing projects. So I don't want to just say, hey, this package is only available to my sponsors. It's one of the rare packages that I just keep to myself. Like I could do that, but something just felt like off about it. And I'm restricting the growth of it. Like there's so many reasons that's just not satisfactory. Every time I come to that decision in my head, I go, you know what? I'd rather not have the $200 or whatever. And I'd rather just everybody use it. I don't know. Right. When it comes down to like dollars and cents, I'm never like, yeah, it's worth the $1,000. I'm always like, it's not worth it. So I kind of posed to him this problem that I feel like any of the non-open source options are no good for me. And then the open source option as well. Like nobody wants to, if you say, hey, this is sponsorware, you have a moral obligation to be a sponsor if you use this. Nobody's going to do it. Like that's just how it works. Like people just don't do that. Very few people do. Not enough to drive sustainability across the open source ecosystem. Like there is some, but it's not going to move the needle, so to speak. Yeah. So he came up with this. He was like, so what if you didn't, I think he compared it to another, I don't actually know the product, but let's just say Massdrop. Are you familiar with Massdrop? No. Okay. I'm like barely familiar. So I was hoping you were familiar so you could check me on this. Sorry. Let's just pretend this is how it works. Or maybe Kickstarter or something. I don't know. This idea that you don't release something until you have a volume, like a critical mass. Yeah, I was thinking about it like Kickstarter kind of. You're basically pitching an idea, right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, in your case, I guess it's a library, so maybe you already had the software written and you just kept it. Yeah. Yeah. But ostensibly you wouldn't even need to do that. You could go on your history and your good name and say, here is my idea for an open source library. Actually, I think Yehuda Katz did that a few years ago with a Kickstarter
on some sort of a Ruby packaging thing, and he had a successful Kickstarter campaign. And this kind of reminds me of that.
Kickstarter is a good analogy. So, basically he had proposed that, like, what if you kept it just to sponsors until you reached a certain threshold, and then at that threshold of sponsors or monthly income or whatever, you release it to open source. And it was one of those ideas that felt like it came out of the clouds. Like he said that, I was like, dude, that's it. That's exactly it. It's perfect because it really answers all the questions for me. It checks all the boxes. It's still open source. So at the end of the day, it'll be an open source project. If it's open source, it will be sustainable because it will have already earned its keep. And I get to make money. So I get to make money and I get to have open source stuff. So I thought it was a great idea. Yeah.
It's interesting because the actual sponsorship goes to you, the person. It doesn't go necessarily to Sushi, the project.
Right.
But they are backing you in order to open up, allow you to open source Sushi. This is GitHub sponsors you're using.
Yeah.
So how many sponsors did you have when you first put up Sushi as sponsorware?
Yeah, I'll run you through the hard numbers and then we can talk causation and intent and things like that. Also, I wanted to note that there is tons of nuance in this whole open source payment discussion. That's why we did that podcast, because there's like, well, what about maintaining the project and not the first person who started it? Whatever, we can get there.
Right.
Here's the brass tacks numbers for this little experiment. So my sponsorship tiers are $9, and they're $9. Right now they're $9, $99, and $250 a month. And $9 is you get nothing.
You get nothing and like it.
You get nothing. You're just contributing to me. That's funny. Even like, listen to my language. You get nothing. You get nothing in terms of those perks that you're supposed to do.
No additional things.
Exactly. But you get the software I write every day, So 99 is like the freelancer or whatever. And you get a logo on the front page. And then 250 is you get a logo on every page of the Livewire docs and 2 hours of consulting, which is actually a wicked deal and probably a mistake. We don't have to get into that. So when I did this, I had 21 total sponsors, I think. I had one 250 a month, $199, and the rest were $9. So I did this, and originally on the podcast, Daniel said, yeah, make it like 40 sponsors as your goal. And I was like, 40, that seems a little bit steep, but I don't know, maybe. So after the podcast, when I actually sat down to implement all this stuff, I realized I got to just go for this. I got to go for it. 40 is not going to move the needle that much for me. 75. So then I thought I'll do 50. And then I actually wrote 50 in the README. And right before I sent out an email, I threw 75 and I was like, you know what? Change it to 75. And so I did that and we hit it in, I think I hit 75 in probably 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have a pretty decent email list. I think that was really the main reason why this worked so well. And the idea was, it was a pretty good idea, and it already had 1,200 likes on Twitter, this little tweet of the idea. So there was already an audience kind of ready for this. But yeah, I moved it from 21 or something to 75. And my monthly, when I go in and GitHub sponsors dashboard, the monthly number was 577 a month, I think, was how much I had in GitHub sponsors. I'll just say now, I think by the end of it, I had, I don't even know, but now I have 1,900 a month. So basically,
that's significant.
It is. In a few days, I basically made $15,000 for the year, on a small project that took me, it took me 2 hours to write the first version. And total hourly is just so small for this project. It's a very tiny, it's a one file project. It literally is one file.
Sushi.php. There it is.
It's one file. It's just a novel idea. And it went from something that would have made me $0 to something that contributed almost $20,000 to my income. No, that's not true. Maybe between 10 and 15. So it was basically I'll just say conservatively, a $10,000 endeavor that just kind of popped into our heads and then landed in my lap. Yeah.
I would say that's a success story.
Yeah, it felt like it. It does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty quick turnaround. I think you can probably... So talk me through the marketing logistics of this. So you already put out the Sushi idea.
Yeah.
and people liked it. So you already knew there was some interest around that.
Yeah.
And then you turned around and you sent an email to your mailing list that said, basically, okay, I'm writing Sushi. If you want me to open source it, I got to get to 75 GitHub sponsors. I'm wondering how much of this may have been because the novelty of the idea, because there's some of that, like, especially with a lot of your backers might be indies and devs and like, oh, cool. Obviously, you can't necessarily quantify all this, but I'm just curious, how did you actually pitch this to your audience?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how much we could rinse and repeat this and have success for other people.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of factors here. So to give more details, the email list was 3,000 people, which is a decent list, at least for me. And that's my generic email. Like I've resisted segmenting my email list. So it's basically one list, giant list of people that I send an email to every so often, that are generally interested in the things that I do and are generally in the Laravel community and aware of those things. And on Twitter, I have like 10,500 followers. Actually, I had less than 10,000 before I did that tweet. I gained a bunch just from the tweet. So the original Sushi tweet had 1,200 likes, which is probably in the top 5 tweets ever for me. So I think it's worth mentioning that it.
And this was just pitching the library, right? Not the sponsorware.
Yeah, this was just the idea. It wasn't even a library. I just like wrote this little thing.
But saying like,
yeah, that's just a library. Yeah.
What if I wrote this? Right.
Yeah. Yep. So I think it's worth mentioning that it did resonate strongly with a bunch of people, like above average. It wasn't my average idea. It wasn't my average project. It was something.
It wasn't Get Down.
It wasn't Get Down. Exactly. Get Down would not have done this. Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. That's good to know.
So there was that. And so I sent out that email, and emails convert really well for things like this. And that's definitely an important note. I think if I just went on Twitter and said, hey, this is sponsorware, it wouldn't have had the success that it had. I have a tiny bit of experience with this sort of thing, launching something to an email group and seeing how that works. And this is how that worked.
Moving forward a little bit, because I think that does help color it. I think if we look at now, you're at 83 sponsors. Now let's think about rinsing and repeating. So you've done this with Sushi. It's open source. Everyone got access to that. Imagine doing this again. You basically would just come up with a new idea.
Yep.
Or write some new software and keep the repo private, or I guess the repo has to be public, but don't put the source files in there because there's a README and stuff.
I kept the repo private.
Oh, you did?
So this was all like minimum effort. This was like me. I'm really glad I got to try this out without really caring about the project. Like I cared so little about this project, I named it Sushi. Like I was one of those naming decisions where I was like, I'm not going to stress. I'm just going to do the first ridiculous thing I think about.
Well, so the repo had to be public, though, because I found the README and it said this will be open sourced when I hit 75 sponsors. So the README at least had to be out there, right?
The README wasn't out there. No, you found it when the README was stale and it was public.
Oh, so I thought the README was part of the marketing.
No, so the marketing was all back channel, emails, and Twitter.
So you could do a thing where you actually create the repo public, open source, and just keep the source code out.
Yeah.
And let the README be part of your marketing and say, you could even have README driven development. Like you could have the API out there, everything.
Yeah.
For the code.
Right.
I thought that's what you had done because I found it after you'd open sourced it.
That's almost an even better idea. I mean, that's something I thought of, but it was just so like last minute that I didn't worry about it. But you're right that, and also this idea is so simple. It's like one of those cool ideas that's actually super simple, but like the value in the idea is the idea, not the implementation. Or like Livewire.
Yeah, the implementation is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the implementation is simple. So I thought if I release basically my full vision implementation, like somebody would just write it for themselves. Like, and in general, the community I'm in is nice enough to not, just like do that. But yeah, so what I did was keeping a repo private and open to only a few people is pretty tough, actually. Like the only free way to do it, to my not like free easy way, is adding people as contributors on the project to your private repo. So I made the repo private. I added people as contributors, and so they actually had like push access. Like people could do kind of anything they wanted in the repo, but again, they're nice enough to not. But I just took all my sponsors, and every time I got a new sponsor, I literally copy and pasted them into the contributors thing in GitHub. And then when I reached a 75, I just hit make public. So it was just simple and easy for me. I didn't have to deal with anything. But you're definitely right that having a README, having docs, things like that, something is like a marketing page for your project before it goes public is really nice. And I also want to say an important thing is that I gave the sponsors the software right away. And I think that's a big deal.
So even when you weren't at 75, you started at like 25. So like sponsor number 26 comes in. Yeah. And they don't have to wait for 75. Like that would be the worst thing ever. So I was thinking like, what would be the threshold where it's like, I need 250. And I would look at that and be like, well, you're never going to get there. So I'm not going to.
Yeah, there's so much weirdness involved with that. Like, oh, what if it takes like 3 months? I paid $40 and the next guy
I'll wait until it gets close and then I'll pay.
Yeah,
so I think that actually is a required and somewhat brilliant aspect of the mechanism is everybody who sponsors gets access right now.
Yeah.
And then when we hit a threshold, everybody else gets access.
Exactly. I think that's really, really key to the idea. Yeah.
So if you were going to rinse and repeat, let's say you come out with a new idea.
I'm planning on it. I got the idea.
You are?
I'm already starting to talk about it. Yeah.
What's it called? Kale?
So it's called Project L. So this is one of
L.
the things that I've sort of done over time now is like, I punt on naming projects because I always regret naming something too early. Livewire was originally, it was Laravel LiveView, then it was Lightwire, then it took a while to get to Livewire. Alpine started out, when I wrote Alpine, I wanted to punt on everything not important. So I called it Project X. So now all my projects are basically project and then a letter. And so this Project L is totally unnamed. And it's live. It's a full app. It's my idea of like the common denominator of all web apps built, what I would believe perfectly, like what I deem as perfect, or at least really well thought out in Laravel with Livewire and Alpine with full tests, everything, like totally a full on app that you can have access to, read the source and go like, oh, I need infinite scroll, or, oh, I need a data table, or I need a date picker. Like, well, I'll go to Project L and I'll, see where Caleb does that. And
like a reference implementation.
Yeah.
Right. All the basics.
Yep. Which to me is like really the most valuable thing for a project. Like docs are great, but I wanted to see examples and
same with me.
Yeah. So it seems like kind of pushing that to the extreme is like, why don't we just make an entire app? And that's the example. So anyway, that's Project L. And I'm working on that in the background and sort of tweeting about it as I go, little screen shares and tips and things like that. And my current plan for it is sponsorware, basically. I'm speaking at Laracon Online at the end of the month. And so at Laracon Online, I'll release 1.0 of Livewire and I'll release Project L only to sponsors. And I'll set a threshold and I'll tell everybody it's open to everybody when I hit this threshold. And it'll probably be a pretty high threshold because of how much value you would get from it and how much work I'm putting into it.
You got a number in mind?
The first one that popped into my head was 150, but that honestly might be low.
Yeah, that's less than double.
Right. Project L is the kind of thing that could be valuable enough that that people like forget about sponsorware. People would just gladly pay $10 a month to get access to it, like a decent amount of people. So yeah. So the next number that popped in my head was 250, but then I'm like, that's a lot, but who knows?
Yeah.
The nice thing with all this is
you don't have to get to the threshold to be valued. Like,
yeah, right.
The fact that you give each person access means you don't have to hit that 250 to get value from yourself, right? It's not like you're waiting for 250 and then you hit a threshold and now you get your money or now you can do your thing. And then B, each person, they don't have to wait for 250 either. Like, all right, I'll just pay the $10 or the 99 right. If I want to be a big baller, or the 250 if I'm a big baller. But that 250 threshold, you could set it out a ways and it's not a huge risk to do that, I guess is the point.
Yeah. It's really not at all. In fact, with Sushi, that was kind of my thinking was like, all right, I'm going to set it at 75. If we don't get there for a month and everybody forgets about this, fine. When like everybody already has the software. And then when I do some other sponsorware that has a higher threshold, when we get to 75, I'll just be like, oh yeah, by the way, Sushi's public, everybody, if you care, and it'll be like another round of advertising for Sushi to be like, oh, cool. We forgot about that, but nice. Sponsorware's like pays eventually. So that's kind of a cool idea. Is like, I could set this to 250 and let's say we don't get there for 5 months. I do another project and that gives it the steam to get there. Then it's like this one number.
It's additive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This seems like a really nice model for indie developers with many small or small-ish projects and existing audiences of some kind.
Yep.
I think people with less audience, maybe with one large project, where they can't spin off new ideas very often, would struggle with this. I'm curious, in your experience so far, have you had any blowback? Anybody say, this is a lame idea, or I don't like you, Caleb, or
not a single person. I always get at least a hater or two on pretty much anything I do. And this, I didn't hear any haters. No, definitely not. It doesn't feel like a paywall because, like people get backlash on paywalls all the time, especially ones that started out as like open source things or whatever. But I think it just doesn't feel like a paywall, so people aren't that mad about it. They're like, oh, well, I don't know. No, I haven't gotten any negative reaction to it at all. It's so perfect for me because I think I kind of suck at like every other monetization model, or like I know I'm good at building software that's like that's something that I'm good at, is building useful software, I guess. Everything else just seems like a gamble. And I don't want to gamble on something unless I know it's going to work. So I'm always like, should I try this thing? Yeah, it's not worth the barely any money I'm going to make. Like, just keep releasing things for free. So this is honestly, it's like the easiest and most reliable. I think it's going to be really huge, at least for me. And I hope for other people like me.
Well, many listeners of this show are maintainers like yourself. And I'm sure, because this sounds like it has been maybe if not a home run, at least a triple. This has been something that, we haven't found too many models that seem to be easily reproduced and working really well without, like you said, a bunch of additional work.
Right.
So you either become a marketer, or you become a support team, or you become a writer of documentation and help, or you become a mentor, or you become an entrepreneur and start a support business around it. Like every single monetization strategy, almost all of them require and now I'm a business person. Well, I really wanted to write open source software.
I know.
And so I'm sure that many of our listeners are going to give this a try. And to the listeners out there, if you do try this, let us know how it goes.
Yeah.
I think iterating the idea and trying it in different environments. Oh, it didn't work so well for me, or worked even better. Here's what I did. Can really just help push the needle for all of us.
I think worth mentioning, there's two real changes in perspective on the whole open source sponsorship thing that I had that led to this. I think are worth mentioning, and I think you kind of touched on a little bit. First one being, I switched my brain to realize that the software that I write is the value. Like that justifies money. So it's not that I'm not necessarily even saying there's a obligation or a responsibility. I think there is, but what I'm saying is that the software I write is where the value is. And when I write things in my perks, like get a free sticker, which I did, I started that and realized nobody cares about the sticker, and now I just have to ship all these stickers. I just removed the stickers. I was like, even that notion, perks are nice, and honestly, people need. That's where sponsorware comes in. People need some incentive to sign up. They're not just going to reflect to themselves on the value they derive from your open source software and hit that sponsor button. Some will, but that's not going to do it. So for me, I changed all my language. I removed the sticker perk. I removed most of the perks so that it was pretty blatantly obvious on my page that what you're doing is supporting me in the software I write. I also avoided language like buy me a cup of coffee, things like that suggest that this is just some side thing, or I even avoided things like the opposite of that, like feed my family, because that also, what if I make way more than what you need to feed a family? Now am I being disingenuous? No, the work is what justifies the money. It's not that I have some obligation to make, and I'm not like a pastor who has an obligation to not make too much, basically, or that people might think that or something. No, I'm making software that's valuable. And if I end up making $1 million a year off GitHub sponsors, I don't want to feel guilty about it. And I think it's fine because I'm providing that much value to you. So that was first, it was a language and mental change for me, was switch the language from this is all side stuff, Patreon style, buy me a cup of coffee, to no, this is, I'm giving you valuable things. You're paying me for that. That's the transaction. So that was one shift, was changing that language. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I'm looking at your sponsorship page now. We'll put that page in the links for anybody who would like to use Caleb as a model for what they're up to. And I will say the $9 a month individual perk is access to Sushi. So there it is, software, right? Here it is.
Yeah, I got to remove that now because everybody can access.
Yeah, everybody has that.
Thanks for the heads up.
Oh, there you go. $99 a month perk is logo, name, link, and listed on the README and Livewire landing page. This is for a freelancer/startup. So again, this is not like buy me a cup of coffee. This isn't sending you stickers. This is like there's some business value there for them. And then $250 or $249 a month. The perks are logo, name, link listed on every single page of Livewire docs, and then 2 hours of Livewire consulting per month. So that one does have more of a quid pro quo, so to speak.
So the $250 a month is broken because it defies everything I just said.
Yeah, so you need to update your tiers a little bit. But I really like what you just said, and I think that is an important thing to remember, is that we're not out there panhandling for spare change, and we're not like here to trade extra things. That's what the tier system and the perk system always kind of rubbed me the wrong way as well, because it's like, especially on Kickstarter, like you see all these perks or on Patreon, and I start thinking like, man, they're gonna have to send out like 25,000 t-shirts or whatever it is, like it's so much work that you're just building for yourself. So
it's like, that is the fundamental change. It's like, I already do the work. That's right. The $250 a month tier, to at least caveat why that exists with the 2 hours. Well, because I do want money, and that's a way that I can sort of build up that, like, just since I launched Sushi. So I have Livewire behind me, so that's worth mentioning, that it's not like all these people. I don't think I would get a $250 a month sponsor for Sushi, just so everybody knows. But for Livewire, heck yeah. So I've gotten like three new $250 a month sponsors, maybe 2 new, I don't know, which is a big deal. Like those are the ones that really move the bottom line for me. And I thought, well, yeah, so $250 is actually a deal. It's less than I charge for freelancing. For 2 hours of freelancing, it's $300 for me. So, and it's a small amount. It's like it could like derail me from my trains of thought and things like that if I pile these up. But my thinking was, you'll notice that it's Livewire consulting. So it's consulting on a project that I build. So my mind was like, all right, I could use the extra money, and it'll plug me into real people using my software, which is super duper valuable. If I'm spending, let's say 8 to 15 hours a month working with real people who are using my software in production in like enterprise style situations, that's huge. Like I would want every maintainer to have that. I would want every project I use to know that the maintainer is working with real people in the trenches. So that was kind of a reason why I did that and why it sort of seems off, but that's the justification behind it.
There is one aspect I agree with that. I'll add to that and say that when you get a new agency or business at $250 a month sponsoring you for Livewire, them being successful with Livewire is foundational to that continued sponsorship, right? Like if they end up like not being able to get it going, or it doesn't bring them benefit, they're going to switch to something else, and they're going to cancel their Caleb sponsorship perhaps. Yeah. And so like you helping them be successful is an additional thing that's at play there. So I kind of like it. Maybe you just take off the per month and you say, I'll give you, maybe you add it, make it 6 hours or something, like give them like a flat number or something.
Oh, interesting.
So you can get involved with them, but it's not like now you're basically, because you actually put a cap on your time at that tier, because you only have so many 2 hour sessions a month that you can actually divvy out, right? Before you are basically a consultant. So
yeah, that's a really good point. If it was like, just 6 hours and there's your pool of sponsor time, and it would communicate something else. It would communicate like, you're not paying me for my time all the time. You're paying me. It would be clear that you're not paying for my time. The time is like an added benefit of you committing to the project at this level,
Exactly.
So yeah, I do like that. It's definitely something I have to think through. So the second change, the first change is the perks thing and whatnot. The second change was, and this is another Daniel one. He's good at this stuff. This is
you should be stroke of Daniel genius on the monthly.
I know. So he works at the agency that I used to work at. So Daniel, which means he's rolling around in money. No, I'm just kidding. So his suggestion was change your language. So my tier language was usually it's something like coffee, and then the next one's like Netflix, and then the next one's like, it kind of goes up from there.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, and I forget what mine were. I don't remember what mine were, but you're tempted to make it like the smallie, the medium-y, the biggie, or name it after like a fish or something.
You're a fan. You're a hardcore fan. You're the biggest fan ever.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And he was like, change the language to make it an expectation. So rather than like, how much do you want to pay me a month? It's like, I'll tell you what I think your responsibility is to me based on your position, basically like if you're a hacker like me, you don't need to pay $100 a month. Like $9 a month is great. Like if all of us hackers just kind of did that for each other, that would be huge. But if you're a freelancer and you're using Livewire, like I'm communicating that now just in the tiers. Like if you're a freelancer and you're looking at this and you're going, well, yeah, I am a freelancer. You're not just seeing like, yeah, $9 a month. Great. Easy. You're going the individual. Maybe I should call it the hacker even, or like the independent, whatever. And then the second one, you would see freelancer. And I've already gotten response like this. Like people have even communicated with me that this works without knowing they're communicating that to me by saying like, yeah, I'm a freelancer. And I emailed somebody to say, hey, can I have your logo to put on the site? They're $100 a month sponsor. And they said, no, I don't need it. I don't need the recognition. I'm a freelancer and I use Livewire. So I'm giving you $100 a month. And I was like, that's great. Because so that was a change. And then the big one was like, yeah, if you're an agency, like you should be at this higher tier. So I had somebody who was sponsoring me at 100 bump up to 250, basically because of the language change where they went, yeah, okay, that's right. I see I'll respect his expectation, I guess. Yeah.
Well, those are some great insights. Caleb, thanks so much for talking to me today and sharing this experiment you've been doing and all the awesome open source. Listeners, check out Livewire, Alpine, check out GetDown. It's kind of cool. And definitely subscribe to whatever Caleb's up to find out when Project L comes out. Been teasing that relentlessly. We're all excited for, reference implementation of all these things. I think that's a great idea. And my guess is it'll be a hit as sponsorware as well. So, Caleb, thanks for joining us. This has been very insightful and a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jared. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to our Maintainer Spotlight series. Hey, what do you think of the sponsor concept? Let your opinion be heard by popping open the show notes and clicking Discuss This on Changelog News. We'd love to know your thoughts on the matter. Special thanks to our guest, Caleb Porzio, for doing his maintainer thing. This episode was brought to you by our friends at TieLift. They are all about paying the maintainers. And it was produced by me, Jared Santo. We get these farm fresh beats from the one and only Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm curious, do you listen to our outros? If so, tweet at me at Jared Santo because we have no idea if anybody's listening. Thanks again. We appreciate you.